Welcome everyone to Retrofit Talks. I'm Laura Broderick. I'm the Commercial Partnerships Manager at the Building Centre, and I'll be your host today for our session titled Airtightness, Breathable Insulation and Healthy Air Quality. Before we hear today's presentation, I'd like to take the time to tell you a little bit about this online talk series as part of our Retrofit 23 programme at the Building Centre. We've designed the sessions to connect professionals to discuss residential retrofit. We're here to showcase the latest research and projects from architectural practice, offering valuable case studies and solutions for retrofitting our homes. Our guest speakers will present their projects, and that will be followed by a Q&A session with you, our webinar audience. This is our third Retrofit Talks event, and if you missed the past two sessions with Fathom Architects and Knox Bevan, you can catch up with those recordings via our website or our YouTube channel. But back to today. Our speaker today is Dr. Tom Woolley, an architect and environmental researcher living in County Down, Northern Ireland, and working for Bevan Architects. He is best known for his work on sustainability, building materials, health and indoor air quality. He was Professor of Architecture at Queen's University Belfast from 1991 to 2007 and is a visiting professor at the Centre for Alternative Technology. He is the chair of the UK Clean Air Steering Committee and the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Carbon Monoxide and the Ecological Design Association for Northern Ireland. Tom Woolley has published extensively on construction, planning, housing, green architecture and buildings and health. His latest book is titled Natural Building Techniques. He is the winner in the Unlock Net Zero Climate Champions Powerlist 2022. And so we are very pleased that we could take this opportunity to invite him to speak today with us, the Building Centre, and you, our audience. We'll be hearing from Tom for about 20 minutes. He'll review the potential to use bio-based and natural breathable materials in retrofit, outlining the range of materials available, the benefits in terms of health, indoor air quality, avoiding condensation, and providing excellent thermal performance. So thank you all for joining. I'm now delighted to hand over to Tom. Tom, if you could unmute now, that would be great.
Great. Thanks very much to the people at the Building Centre for inviting me to do this, and also for being incredibly patient dealing with some of the technology problems that we've had anyway. It's good to meet everybody today, and I'm going to try and pack as much as I can into this short presentation. So this is just, so next slide, please. So just in terms of my own experience, I am getting a bit old these days, but still very energetic, particularly in this area of work. But I did start out as a student, my final year thesis is about refurbishment. So I've always felt that retrofit was a very important, but perhaps underrepresented area of architectural education and architecture practice. Next. So we hear all these calls for retrofit program. In a way, you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't aware of all of this. So it's really just to remind people that there are all sorts of absurd proposals for retrofitting lots and lots of houses, but often made by people who really have no idea how to do that. Next slide. And the other big problem we've had is we've had really a number of years, at least a decade or more now, of what has become, which Kate de Selincourt has described as the retrofit disaster. And I certainly have given a number of talks about the retrofit disaster problem, in that the wrong materials and methods are often being used to renovate buildings and cause to what is rather euphemistically called unintended consequences. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be promoting the potential for using natural bio-based materials, because these are hygroscopic. That means they are able to deal with moisture much better than conventional synthetic materials. They're vapor permeable, which is often described as being breathable, which is not a very scientific term. Provide excellent insulation, but they also often have thermal mass. They're mostly fire safe. They have very low embodied energy, which is an issue which is still struggling to get onto the agenda, and they can lock up carbon as well. And there are many studies coming out now setting out the scientific case for bio-based materials. Here's just one example, for instance, of a recent paper. Next, please. So first of all, this morning I've actually been on a seminar organised by Innovate UK about sheep wool insulation, so I thought I should mention that. Sheep wool insulation is a natural bio-based material made from effectively a waste product, because the farmers get next to nothing for the fleeces. And there was a very interesting session this morning that I attended about the potential for manufacturing sheep wool insulation in the UK. So that's worth looking at. Next. And there are a growing number of companies producing or selling what we call bio-based materials, especially hemp-based products. Some of the people who were on this morning's thing about sheep wool are a company called Tech in Scotland. There's a big factory being set up by Indie Nature producing hemp insulation. There's a company called Hempspan. There are a range of products from a very innovative company called Breather. I'm also going to mention a company in Shropshire called Lime Green. So one of the arguments often used against the use of bio-based materials instead of conventional materials is that there's no supply chain, or they're difficult to get hold of, or they're expensive. Those are really largely myths now. The products are available, and a lot of these companies could scale up production if there was a greater demand. Next. So, for instance, Lime Green in Shropshire have developed a renovation system called Warm Shell, which is using wood fibre insulation. And this is very popular among many architects and other organisations. Next. For instance, what used to be called the Carbon Co-op, now People Powered Retrofit in Manchester, have been renovating many houses for their members using wood fibre insulation, and we've used this ourselves very successfully. Isn't necessarily always appropriate for projects, but it's a good. So next slide, please. Another product which is being promoted quite heavily now in the UK is cork lime. Fantastic product. The companies that produce this are very high standard. They come from Portugal and Italy mainly, but it's very expensive, unfortunately. Maybe if they sold more of it, the price might come down a bit. But and the other problem, of course, is we don't grow cork trees in the UK, so it has to be imported. Next. Hemp lime is, in my view, the best material to use, and is something that we've used extensively now. So I've got some pictures here of the wonderful Graham Durant from a company called Hemp Lime Spray. Here you can see him spraying a wall with hempcrete using a laser to get a straight line, straightish line anyway. And then at the bottom right-hand corner, the recent project that I went to see that he did in Tipperary, where the hemp lime has been sprayed on the outside of the old stone walls of this building. Next. Hemp lime's been used for the last 20, maybe even 30 years as a renovation material. Here's a project in Herefordshire and one near Heathrow Airport, again, where hemp lime is being used internally, or in the case of the bottom right one on the outside of a building. It can be used in both situations. Next. There's been an exponent of using hemp lime to renovate historic listed buildings in Bristol. Simon James Lewis has been working on this for many years and has done this very successfully. And we find that many conservation officers are very open to the use of hemp lime, where particularly it's replacing the old wattle and daub or that, lath and plaster that's failed. It's a tremendous material to use with these sort of buildings. Next. Also, here's an example of someone in South Wales who's been using hemp lime to renovate relatively modest, not listed or historic buildings, just ordinary houses. And here you can see the hempcrete being using temporary shuttering to put it in place. If you do it carefully, you almost don't even need to plaster it because you can actually paint directly onto the hempcrete once it's dried out, which if you do it properly, it dries out very quickly in a couple of weeks. Next. The building I'm most proud of that I've been involved in is the Rediscovery Centre in Dublin. This is a conversion renovation of an old steel frame boiler house, and all the walls here have been renovated with hempcrete. About 90 cubic meters of hempcrete gone into this building. We actually used some wood fibre and recycled sheet wool insulation in this building as well, and it was a great project to do because Dublin City Council fully supported it. Even though the materials were innovative, they were very happy with what we've done. And you can go and visit the building because it's open as a visitor centre and the centre for the circular economy in Ireland. Next. So the hemp and lime materials to do hemp lime or hempcrete are readily available. We get our most of our hemp from Yorkshire. There's a couple of companies producing hemp shiv there. The main one we work with is a company called Harrison Spinks. You can see some of the people there sitting on some bales of hemp. They mainly make mattresses in which they use natural wool and hemp for the mattresses, and so they have plenty of shiv left over, and I can put you in touch with them if you want to buy some hemp. And then Lime Green, a company in Shropshire, a very sophisticated, fantastic company producing a range of lime products. They've also developed a lime binder, which we've used very successfully in projects. There are other suppliers available, but I like to use UK produced materials rather than importing them from Europe. Next. You can also use hempcrete, hemp lime in block form. Blocks can be very useful in certain kinds of retrofit, particularly where you've got straight walls. And here there's a company called the Hemp Block Company based in Buckinghamshire. The picture on the top right is not one of their projects. It's actually where somebody's very, very innovative use of hemp blocks in a roof of a building in Portugal. Hempcrete blocks is another way of using hemp lime instead of spraying it or casting it. Next. Also, in terms of finishing, we've been recently using a product called Lime Coat, which comes from Suffolk, Haverhill, a company which is very easy to apply and can be used externally and internally. So there's a wide range of materials readily available if you want to use this kind of material. Next. One of the big advantages of hemp lime and hempcrete is it's completely non-flammable. This is actually a new build project you can see on this slide, which had a serious fire, but the hempcrete was completely undamaged in the fire. The only damage which you can see in one of the pictures there was caused by the fire brigade, not by the fire. And the house has been completely renovated without any problems at all. Also, we have obtained certification for hempcrete. There are various bodies that certify the materials. Next. Here's a very interesting project. A number of years ago, I did a workshop, you can see the bottom right, with a group of architects and engineers in Cape Town, South Africa. And one of the architects has gone on there to do some amazing work where they've set up a company producing their own hempcrete blocks. And they're renovating a 12-story tower block office building in the center of Cape Town. So we're not just talking about houses in the countryside here. We're talking about buildings in urban situations where you can use hempcrete. Next. We do quite a lot of training workshops. There's slight pictures from a number here. We've done them in Northern Ireland, Irish Republic, Manchester, and even recently in Iceland, where they're developing the use of hemp lime in Iceland. Next. So I just want to explain a bit more carefully the important reasons for this. What I've come across over the last years is that many of the conventional systems of retrofitting buildings, particularly using polymer cement renders, polystyrene insulation, cavity wall insulation, and internal wall insulation, lead to serious problems of dampness. Kate de Selincourt's drawn attention to the project in Preston at Fishwick, but there are many, many, many more examples. And in fact, I've done a whole series of radio interviews recently all over the UK and Scotland, where people have been complaining about problems with damp and mold as a result of bad retrofit, which doesn't allow the buildings to breathe. Next. There have been some estimates that perhaps 1.5 million homes have been blighted by damp after what they call cowboy builders, but actually it's not just cowboy builders. Some of these work has been done by very conventional, perfectly good builders, but they're using the wrong materials. Next. For instance, a study that I was involved in, I was on the steering committee of this, done in Northern Ireland by the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, of about 1,000 houses that have been insulated with cavity wall insulation, found that 63% of the houses were defective, and that's not unusual in my experience. In fact, in many parts of the UK, South Wales, for instance, they're now extracting a lot of the insulation that had been installed in houses because of the dampness problems. Next. So sealing up buildings with non-breathable materials is not the way to go. For instance, a lot of people are saying that the one-stop shop system in Ireland, the bottom left pictures from Ireland, where they're putting polystyrene on the outside of houses, is a really great scheme. I have to say I'm somewhat skeptical about that and worry about the impact that this is going to have on buildings because there's no vapor permeability. Next. And of course, this came to a shocking attention when little Awab in Rochdale died, and the coroner quite clearly came to the conclusion that this was a result of mold that caused his asthma. And when I went to visit Ilminster House, where Awab had lived, I was shocked to find that this had this render system on the outside, which had presumably stopped the building from breathing. They were still carrying out investigations into that. Next. One of my worries is that many of the people who promote various insulation, thermal improvement, retrofit schemes tend to refer to insulation just as insulation. So here, for instance, the Letty guide lists insulation, in which it quite rightly includes natural insulation materials, but it also includes synthetic insulation materials, as though they're all the same. And I think that's really worrying. We have to be moving away from petrochemical, non-breathable insulation solutions to buildings. And I'm shocked that there are organizations that are still promoting this. Even Active House, which I think is a better way of looking at these issues, is not strong enough on materials in my view, even though I'm very supportive of Active House. Next. One of the biggest worries, I think, is wrapping buildings in plastic, and this is often done in retrofit. And I've been doing some research recently into the use of flame retardants in the polyethylene airtightness membranes that are used. And I'm part of a group of scientists that has recently published a paper about the dangers of flame retardants. I don't have time to go into this in detail just now, but it's really important to draw attention to this. Next. Sealing up buildings can be harmful to health. A very important project was called the Hemp project in Scotland that looked at the health effects of modern airtight construction and has published a really useful designer's guide on this. You know, we have to be watching out for the dangers of airtightness. Next. And one of the things which we now do is we test for indoor air quality. This is a relatively affordable way of doing things using an air sampling pump, and you leave it running for about 4 hours, and then the tube then goes off to a laboratory, and we get a report back which shows us how many houses are have quite high levels of volatile and toxic chemicals in them. There's a test here of a new house, in this case, not a retrofit project, but where the house had not been lived in, but it already had quite high levels of mold, for instance, in the house. And this is something we're coming across increasingly, is that the kind of conventional materials used in house construction actually come with the mold already built in. Next. So, in my view, the way to avoid these problems, to avoid mold and damp and bad indoor air quality, is to use healthy, vapor permeable, natural hygroscopic materials. To me, that's a really important solution for retrofitting buildings in the future. Next, I think might be the last slide. Yes, so if you're still puzzled, because I've rattled through this very quickly, and the best thing to do is to buy my book. Sorry about being so commercial, but it's really important. That's the best way, in my view, to get the ideas out. And Natural Building Techniques has been very successful book. It's been out for just about a year now, and there's been a great deal of interest. And in fact, now I'm starting to get people coming on my courses, and I'm trying to sell them the book, and they said, no, we've already got it. So it really goes into a lot more depth about some of the issues that I've been talking about today. So, or you could contact me at my Gmail address, and I'm very happy to respond to any questions that you might have just now. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate your presentation. And as you say, we've now got time for questions. So Tom, feel free to keep your camera on and obviously unmute when it comes to answering. We do have the Q&A chat function for people who've yet to submit a question but would like to. Feel free to use that. We've got about 15 minutes, but we do have some in already, Tom. So I'll address those to you for answering, if that's okay. So this first question came in from James Erskine, and Tom, and James is asking, what resources, events, forums do you use to find out about these bio-based materials? For example, Tom, do you know of any good go-to one-stop shops?
Yes, there are one or two people who are starting to promote more natural materials, but they tend to lose them among a whole lot of other materials, unfortunately. I think there's still a lot more work to be done on this, and I'm actually writing a report for University of Suffolk following a seminar that we had on how to mainstream bio-based materials. And I think one of the things that we identified was how it's still quite difficult for people to get hold of things. I mean, even my book on natural building techniques is already out of date to a limited extent, in that there's quite a few new products that have come on the market since I did the research on that. So there's a guy who told me I ought to have done the book online so it can be updated all the time, and so he's obviously right about that. So I think one of the things I'm going to recommend as part of this University of Suffolk report is that we set up a new network of people with all these products so that we can and I know there's some interest in that, particularly from the seminar I was at this morning on wool insulation. But do email me. It'd be good to find out about your particular product.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And yeah, as the building centre, we obviously don't exclusively promote natural materials, but we're doing more of that. We've got quite a lot of natural materials insulation products within the Retrofit 23 exhibition and on our product finder as well. So yeah, I think just let's keep pushing for more and more to be added. So yeah, thank you. We'll go to your next question, Tom. So this is from Muhammad Ali. Hello, are there any legal guidelines for the quantity of fresh air ventilation per occupant?
Yes, there are. I mean, there are regulation in the building regulations set out the air quality and ventilation requirements, and they are, I think, under revision at the moment, so that's worth having a look at. But there's a whole debate to be had here about what's the best way of ventilating buildings, whether to use natural ventilation or mechanical ventilation or a combination of the two. And ventilation is clearly important, but what we've found is using hygroscopic breathable materials like hempcrete in a building, that the demand for ventilation is reduced considerably because we don't have the same levels of moisture in the building that we need to get rid of. So that's an important factor which affects ventilation standards.
Great, thank you, Tom. And we've got quite a lot of questions coming in a flurry there, so we'll try and get through them all. But we do have to finish at 1:45. So, people, if I don't get through to every single question, Tom has also provided his email, and so please do feel free to reach out to Tom independently, but let's do our best. So this one's from Matthew Eves. Tom, how do we hit performance targets whilst avoiding thermal bridging, given space constraints in retrofit without using petrochemical based insulation, given its higher thermal performance?
Right, well, I disagree that petrochemical insulation materials have a higher thermal performance because they don't have any thermal mass. They lose heat much more quickly than bio-based materials, particularly those with thermal mass. The specific heat capacity of something like hempcrete means that the temperature stays the same. So I think it's a myth that these petrochemical materials have a higher thermal performance. If you believe the U values that these companies claim, that you mustn't be tricked into thinking that's the only thing. But also in terms of thermal bridging, we've got a fair amount of evidence, which I haven't shown here, particularly in new build with something like hempcrete, where we don't get any thermal bridging at all, and we're able to get fantastic airtightness as well. Not right down to passive house standards, but but we can get pretty close to that, and I think we can deal with those sort of problems fairly easily. It's not a problem.
Great, thank you. And question from Jordan Lee. What are the political barriers to the widespread use of bio-based insulation materials? It's interesting because you started with your political slides, Tom, so I'll be interested to hear what you say.
Yes, I think it's a very good point. I've had some very promising conversations with 2 or 3 members of parliament recently about setting up an all-party parliamentary group on bio-based materials, which I'm hoping might be something we can do in the coming year. Because there's a great deal of resistance. There's a huge amount of lobbying from the petrochemical companies, and they do a lot to dish the dirt on natural materials. There's a lot of fake propaganda out there about hempcrete takes too long to dry out, and sheet wool gets full of moths and all sorts of rubbish like that. And but there's also a problem that the government doesn't support the hemp industry. That farmers want to grow more hemp, they want to produce medicinal cannabis products. There's a whole range of potential things, but there's a huge prejudice against hemp, for instance, which we have to overcome. So there are some political issues, but attitudes are changing as well.
Excellent, very interesting, Tom. So moving on, question from Hassan. Do you still find indoor air quality issues in designs combining air tightness membranes with mechanical ventilation and heat recovery?
Yes, we're been able to renovate and build hempcrete houses, for instance, without airtightness membranes. So the indoor air quality is superb. As soon as you start filling a building with plastic materials that have contaminated with flame retardants and so on, you're going to get serious air quality. And I don't believe that MVHR systems deal adequately with getting rid of the pollutants. You really, it could possibly make a difference, but I think the claims about the benefits of MVHR are exaggerated.
Thank you, Tom. Sorry, there's so many questions. Everyone's super excited to know more about all these products and the application of them. So are you happy for me to keep going, Tom?
Yeah, well, you've got a couple here about cavity walls and cavity
should
insulation. Take those together.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. So the first one around cavity wall is around, can you advise how hempcrete could work with retrofitting a cavity wall? Solid wall seems more straightforward. So some commentary on that would be good. And then the other ones around cavity wall, I'm just quickly scanning.
External insulation is better than cavity insulation, someone's saying.
Yeah, do you want to take those two together then, Tom?
Okay, so you could put hempcrete onto the inside or the outside of cavity walls, no problem, that's the solution. I think cavities should be left full of air. That's what they were originally designed to do. And as soon as you start filling them up with stuff, you can have all sorts of problems. It doesn't always go wrong, but sometimes it does. And so I think I wouldn't take the risk, but I think external insulation is generally better than cavity insulation, because you're then retaining the thermal mass of the inside of the building. It's a much healthier solution. So that's what I would do.
And Tom, someone slightly different type of question. Someone's asking, it's Anna Alonso, is asking about your view on the EPC ratings. And this came up in conversation at our Cafe Retrofit event yesterday. Just whether you think, what would be your advice to someone looking to make improvements to align with the required new credentials based around it? Yeah,
I like to make up silly names of things. So the SAP is the stupid assessment procedure. I haven't come up with a silly name for EPC yet, but there should be one. Possibly, I have thought of quite a rude one for it, but I think we need to go back to the drawing board with these systems and redesign them. We need to change SAP. We need to change EPC so that they actually reflect current practice and current scientific knowledge. So I think it's really important, and it's good to hear that it came up at your event as well. I mean, we need to get some work done on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's available in there and easy to access, but it doesn't always mean it's the right thing or the most accurate. So I think that was the kind of summary from yesterday as well. And then there's a couple of questions around diathanite, your opinions on it, and any insulating plaster similar to it for solid wall. So any commentary around that as a product, Tom?
Well, I'm not going to say anything rude about diathanite, because there are other cork lime products as well. But I have to say, this is new stuff for me. I've recently come across a very interesting scientific paper in the Journal of Hazardous Materials. And I was shocked to find about 15 entries of hazardous chemicals used in various cork composite products. Which hadn't occurred to me before. So this is very new stuff for me, and I'm still looking into that because it takes an age to go through and interrogate. So, but I mean, I still think that cork lime's probably good product, but I am looking into that. So I don't want to say any more because I don't want to upset the people who are selling those products.
And then building on the product question, is what about the U values of the products and thickness? Like, how is that all worked out and shared?
Yes, the U values is another one I'm trying to come up with a rude name for, actually, because the big problem with U values is that U values do not tell you how a product's going to actually perform. You need to consider specific heat and decrement factor as well. So U value is only a quarter of the story. And so if you make your decisions on what materials to use purely on U value, then you're getting it wrong. So that is incredibly important to understand that. Sorry to keep promoting my books, but we have also done a guide to insulation materials published by the Institute of Civil Engineers. Much of the scientific work on that is done by my colleague Esra Al-Latif at Cardiff University, and it's got a whole lot of stuff in there about thinking about how to consider insulation materials. So don't just base your decisions on crude U values. That's not the way to go.
And then, Tom, are you happy to explain a little bit more about what failed at the flats in Rochdale where Awab lived? And
no, I can't. For legal reasons, I can't do that.
Okay.
Sorry, because I've
fine.
only managed to make one visit there, and immediately was pounced on by other residents who are suffering.
Of course.
So we're still looking into that, and the government is in panic mode about this issue as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Moving back to the specific questions on products, what about wool? Does it attract moths?
Well, there was a front page article in the Daily Telegraph about a moth-infested house in Northern Ireland. When I looked into it, I found that it was almost entirely a fake story. So I'm still, you can get something with natural materials if they get damp called paper lice, but I've yet to have any real solid evidence of moths that have actually come from the sheep wool insulation. Usually there's another source, such as old carpets and other things. So I think it's an overblown issue.
Tom, I'm just going to put two final questions to you, and then I'll wrap up for the event. So apologies to those people whose questions aren't addressed in this forum, but as I said, Tom's shared his email and we'll get you to reiterate that as well. So final two questions. So is it essential in your view that breathable bio-based insulation materials avoid the use of plasterboard finishes internally?
That's a very interesting question, because for many years now, a lot of plasterboard products have been made with DSG, desulfurized gypsum, and could potentially be containing hazardous chemicals, including fungicides. Now that's changing at the moment. The industry is aware of that problem, and there are alternative, less hazardous boards. But the great thing about hempcrete is you don't need to use plasterboard. You're not having to hide the insulation behind it for fire reasons. So that's an issue which I could talk to somebody about in more detail if they want to talk about. Sorry to cut across you, but also someone's asking about sensors for VOCs. Again, I can put you on to a very, very good way. Sensors for VOCs are a waste of time. They're rubbish. They're not going to give you any useful information. But there's a much better way of assessing indoor air quality than buying sensors. I've got a couple of sensors and I just use them to frighten people. They don't give you any useful scientific information.
And I think the final question is a nice sort of broad one, which I hope you're happy to respond to, Tom. So what do you consider are the main barriers in the construction industry to more widespread adoption of natural building materials and techniques?
Well, that's easy. Stupidity, ignorance, and prejudice. The construction industry is absolutely full of it. Just go and stand at a counter in a builder's merchant and listen to the nonsense advice that they're giving to builders coming in. I mean, there's a terrible level of ignorance out there. And thanks very much for you running an event, a series of events like this, because that's helping to counter that.
And do you participate in educational activities as an architect, but within the construction industry, are there things that are happening or should be happening that would help with that, do you believe? Like
no, not enough. And also I think in training courses as well, are very, very backward. I mean, they're still not teaching young people to learn who are learning the trades. They're not teaching them enough about these kinds of materials. So that's a big job that we've got to do.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Tom. Super interesting presentation. Lots of compliments in the messages here in the chat function. As I say, we have been recording it, so we will share it. And for those of you who didn't get to have your question answered directly now, Tom, can you say your email address again?
Oh, it's a really stupid one to say because
is it? Sorry.
changed it recently, but it's Woolley, and you have to spell Woolley right, WOOLLEY, lowercase t, and then 0@gmail.com.
Great, and we've just shared.
It's on the screen.
Exactly. We've just shared the final slide, so please do put questions that weren't answered, and of course buy the book, it's there. So yes, as I say, the webinar will be available online shortly. Do share with colleagues and friends who missed today, or if there was detail that you want to go back and hear again, obviously it's a good way to do that. To learn more about our retrofit exhibition, that's on in person at the Building Centre in Store Street, Central London, until the end of September. We'd be, more than welcome to kind of host you. So if you are visiting, you can also let us know that you're coming along. So we also have our website telling you more about our future events. That's thebuildingcentre.co.uk. And then following on with the Retrofit Talks, the Tuesday lunchtime sessions. We don't have one next week, but there is one the following Tuesday. That's the 20th of June. And that's with Marion Bailey from Studio PDP, reflecting on their 10 years of retrofit projects. So do book on that. It's an Eventbrite booking. It's free as well. So please do sign up for that one. If you're in London and you're visiting the exhibition, or you're just here for events, we've got those happening on Wednesday evenings, and we actually have one tomorrow night. So if you haven't yet booked and you can make it, that's the 7th of June, that's tomorrow, Wednesday evening, and it's about natural materials, specifically within case study projects, and discussing how we encourage more kind of actual real applications of those with clients, planners, designers, etc. And there are more of those Wednesday evenings happening. So yeah, again, check out the website. So once again, thank you to Dr. Tom Woolley, for taking the time to share his thoughts on natural materials and how we should be using them. And thank you all for tuning in, and wishing you a great rest of your day. So thank you from the Building Centre. Tom, do you want to just say a quick goodbye to everyone?
No, thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
All right, take care all. Bye.